Welcome back to the homestead, folks. Just last week, I was standing in one of those brightly lit mega supermarkets down in town. I do not make a habit of going there often, but occasionally there's a need. As I walked down the produce aisle, I stopped dead in my tracks. Sitting there on a refrigerated shelf was a tiny, flimsy plastic tray wrapped up tight in cellophane. Inside were maybe 4 or 5 oyster mushrooms. The price tag stuck to that piece of plastic was absolutely shameful. They were asking a premium, hard-earned price for something that the good Lord designed to grow on dead logs and old waste material out in the damp woods. It made me think about the folks I talk to every day, people just like you who are trying to make ends meet. I hear your stories all the time. You are exhausted. You are tired of opening the mailbox to find utility bills that somehow keep climbing higher and higher every single month. You are tired of walking into the grocery store and seeing the prices double while the packages keep shrinking. The big corporations running these food chains and utility companies have built a system designed to keep you completely dependent on them, paying a monthly fee just to feed your family forever. My grandparents, the folks who built a life out of raw dirt and hard work, would have shaken their heads at it all. They live by a very simple rule: waste nothing and provide for yourself. So today, we are taking a big step back toward that independence. I'm going to show you exactly how to stop paying those outrageous prices and grow your own mushrooms directly from the ones you get at the market. We are going to take one single healthy store-bought mushroom and turn it into a continuous, self-reliant food source right in your own home, using nothing but cheap, dried field corn. We are cutting the grocery store out of the equation for good. Now, I always promise to give you the honest truth, and today is no different. I'm not here to sell you a miracle or a magic trick. I have seen folks out there on the internet claiming you can just toss some old mushroom stems into a bucket of yard dirt, walk away, and harvest pounds of fresh food the very next day. I'm telling you right now, that is a fairy tale. Growing mushrooms from scratch is essentially farming the invisible. It requires absolute patience, a careful eye, and most importantly, extreme cleanliness. If you try to take shortcuts, or if you rush through the sanitation steps I'm going to teach you, you will not get edible mushrooms. You will end up growing green mold and nasty bacteria. You will lose your entire batch, and you will have wasted your good corn. Nature has strict rules, and there is no cheating them. We have to be meticulous. We are going to use basic biology and good old-fashioned elbow grease to isolate the pure life force of the mushroom, and we are going to help it conquer those grains of corn before any bad mold can get to it. It is going to take time, and it is going to take careful effort. But if you stick with me, follow the steps exactly, and respect the natural process, you are going to reclaim a little bit of your freedom from that grocery store aisle. Before we get our hands dirty, we need to talk about the why. Knowing why we do something is just as important as knowing how to do it. If you understand the nature of what you're working with, you can solve any problem that comes up. Now, growing mushrooms is a bit different from planting a tomato seed in the garden. We are working with biology on a microscopic level. The very first concept we have to master is sterilization through resting. Later on, I'm going to show you how we prepare our dried corn grains. We do not just boil them once and call it a day. We are going to boil them, and then we are going to leave them sitting right there on the counter for about 12 hours before we even think about moving forward. You might wonder why on earth we would leave wet grains sitting around. Well, it comes down to how fungi and bacteria survive out in the wild. You see, the mold and bacteria that naturally live on harvested field grain have survival mechanisms. They produce these tough, microscopic shields around their spores that can survive extreme heat, drought, and even freezing cold. If we just boil the corn once, we might kill the active bacteria, but those shielded spores will survive the hot water. The moment the corn cools down inside our jars, those surviving spores will wake up and ruin our crop. So we trick them. Our first round of boiling hydrates the corn, but it also sends a signal to those dormant spores. The heat and moisture make them think the harsh conditions are over, that spring has arrived. Over those 12 hours of resting at room temperature, they shed their protective armor and start to germinate. Once they drop their shields and come to life, they are completely vulnerable. That is when we hit them with a second round of boiling, wiping them out completely. It is an old, frugal method of sterilizing things without needing expensive, high-pressure laboratory equipment. The next thing you need to understand is how a mushroom breathes. A lot of folks forget that fungi are not really plants. They do not have leaves, they do not need sunlight to make their food, and they do not breathe in carbon dioxide. They are actually a lot more like us. They need to breathe oxygen to survive, and they exhale carbon dioxide as a waste product. If we were to put our mushroom tissue into a glass jar and seal the lid on tight, that fungus would suffocate on its own breath in a matter of days. But if we leave the lid off, every microscopic speck of dust, mold, and wild yeast floating in the air of your kitchen will fall right into that jar and take over. To solve this, we use a simple piece of cotton. By punching a hole in the metal lid of our jar and pulling a wad of clean cotton through it, we create a breathable filter. The heavy carbon dioxide can slowly push its way out through the fibers, and fresh oxygen can seep back in. Meanwhile, that cotton is dense enough to act like a tangled web, catching and trapping any floating dust or competitor spores before they can drop into our clean corn. It is simple, it is cheap, and it works perfectly. Finally, we need to talk about where our seed comes from. When you look at a mushroom you brought home from the market, you have to realize where it has been. It was grown on a farm, picked by someone's hands, tossed into a plastic crate, shipped in a truck, handled by a grocery store clerk, and left on a shelf. The entire outside of that mushroom is covered in bacteria and wild mold spores. We cannot use the outside, but if you take a thick-stemmed mushroom and carefully split it open, the flesh deep inside the very center of that stem has never touched the outside air. It is pure, clean, and completely sterile. That white fibrous tissue inside is called the mycelium. It is the living network, the root system of the fungus. That tiny, pure piece of tissue from the center of the stem is what we are going to use to colonize our jars. Now that we understand the rules of the game, let us gather what we need. You do not need to order anything from a fancy laboratory catalog. We are keeping this strictly within a household budget. First, you need your mushroom. Go to the market and look through the packages of oyster mushrooms. Do not buy the ones with massive, wide-open caps that are curling up at the edges. Those are old, and their energy is fading. You want to find a cluster that is young and firm, where the caps are still slightly rounded and closed. And most importantly, you want the thickest stems you can possibly find. The thicker the stem, the more pure mycelium we have to work with. You only need one good one. Next, we need the food for our fungus. I use dried field corn, the exact same cheap whole corn kernels you would buy at the feed store for chickens or pigs. If you cannot find whole corn, you can use dried sorghum seeds, wheat berries, or even a bag of cheap brown rice from the pantry. The process is exactly the same. You will need a handful of glass jars. Do not go buying new ones. Wash out old jelly jars, pickle jars, or whatever glass containers you have saved up. Just make sure you can punch a hole in the metal lid with an awl or a nail. You will also need a small bag of regular cotton balls to plug those holes. For our sanitation tools, we need a bottle of 70% rubbing alcohol. Do not use the 90% stuff. It evaporates too quickly to actually kill the germs. 70% is exactly what you want. We will also need a sharp paring knife, a pair of common tweezers, and a simple pocket lighter. That is it. A few dollars worth of supplies, most of which you probably already have sitting around the house. We have our materials, and we understand the science. Next, we are going to get to the stove and start preparing our corn. Let us move over to the kitchen sink and get this corn ready. Take your dried field corn, whatever amount you think you might need for a few jars, and pour it into a good, heavy cooking pot. Run cold water right over top of it and get your bare hands in there. Rub the kernels together vigorously. You're going to see the water turn cloudy, maybe even a little brown, with field dust, chaff, and dirt. Pour that dirty water off, fill it up, and do it again. Keep rinsing and pouring until that water runs absolutely crystal clear. We want to wash away as many surface contaminants and loose debris as possible before we even apply a single drop of heat. We do not want to boil dirt into our grain. Once the water is clear, fill the pot up so the corn is well covered, put it on the stove, and bring it to a rolling boil. Let it boil hard for about 10 to 15 minutes. We are hydrating the grain right now. We do not want the kernels bursting open and turning into a sticky mush, because mush will suffocate our fungus. We just want them to pull moisture deep inside their hulls. After those 15 minutes are up, take the pot off the heat and drain out all the water. Leave the damp, warm corn right there in the empty pot. Put the lid on, nice and tight, and walk away. Leave it sitting right there on your counter for roughly 12 hours, or overnight. Just like we talked about earlier, this is the waiting period where we trick those stubborn, heat-resistant wild spores into waking up. They think the danger has passed, but they are sorely mistaken. Fast forward to the next day. It is time to prep our containers. Take your clean, dry glass jars and spray the insides thoroughly with your rubbing alcohol. Turn them upside down on a clean kitchen towel so all the excess liquid drains out. We do not want any puddles of alcohol pooling at the bottom, just a freshly sanitized glass surface. Once they are drained out, start scooping your rested corn into the jars. Now, pay very close attention here. Do not fill the jars to the top. Stop when they are exactly halfway full. That empty space at the top is absolutely critical. That is the breathing room where the heavy carbon dioxide will gather before it pushes its way out through our cotton filter. If you pack the jar full of grain, your mushroom will choke to death on its own exhaust. Leave that space open. Take your largest cooking pot, the one you might use for making stews. Lay a clean, folded dish towel flat on the very bottom of the pot. This is an old canning trick. Glass jars bouncing against the bare metal bottom of a boiling pot will crack and shatter, and we absolutely cannot afford to waste perfectly good jars or lose our grain. Set your half-filled jars right on top of that towel. Add warm water to the pot until it reaches about halfway up the sides of the jars. Put the pot on the stove, bring that water to a steady, rolling boil, and let it go for 40 to 60 minutes. This is the second boil. This is the killing blow that wipes out all those germinated contaminants. When the time is up, turn off the heat. Do not take the jars out. Do not take the lid off the pot. Leave everything exactly where it is until the water and the jars have completely cooled down to room temperature. I know it is tempting to rush, but if you put a piece of delicate, living mushroom tissue onto a kernel of hot corn, you will cook it instantly. And all this hard work will be for nothing. Patience is the only way forward in this life. Once everything is completely cool, we face the most delicate part of the whole operation. We need to create a sterile zone to transfer our mushroom tissue into the jars. We do not have a fancy laboratory flow hood, so we're going to use a poor man's microbiology trick. We are going to work right next to an open burner on the kitchen stove. The heat from a low flame creates a constant, invisible updraft of air. It acts like a chimney, catching floating dust and microscopic debris and pushing it up and away from our work area. But before we even think about turning on that stove, it is time for our safety word. I cannot stress this enough, folks. We are working with 70% rubbing alcohol in an open flame. Those two things combined are a fast recipe for a house fire if you get careless or distracted. Do not ever, under any circumstances, spray alcohol out of a bottle while your burner is lit. You wipe down your counter, you clean your hands, you spray your tools, and then you move that bottle of alcohol far away to the other side of the kitchen. Only after the bottle is completely out of reach do you strike a match or turn on the burner. Safety always comes first, no exceptions. We are trying to save money here, not burn the homestead down. Once your area is clean, your tools are wiped, your hands are scrubbed, and your low flame is going, bring your cooled jar of corn and your fresh mushroom right next to the heat. Take your knife and carefully peel away the entire outer layer of that thick mushroom stem. Discard that skin completely. What you have left is a thick, white, untouched core. Take your tweezers, split that core open, and cut a small piece right out of the dead center. Pop the lid off your jar, drop that pure white piece of mycelium straight down onto the dry-looking corn, and immediately put the lid back on. You want that jar open for the absolute shortest amount of time physically possible. Every second it is open is a risk. Once the lid is secure with its cotton plug, take the jar to a quiet, dark place. Fungi do not need sunlight. In fact, daylight can sometimes confuse them and trigger them to try and fruit before they are ready. Put the jar inside a plain cardboard box or throw a heavy black cloth over it and keep it in a room that stays right around 68 to 75 degrees. Now, once your jars are tucked away in that dark, quiet corner, the hardest part of this entire endeavor begins: the waiting. We live in a time where folks expect everything to happen at the push of a button. You order something on a bright screen and it shows up on your porch the very next morning. But nature does not run on a corporate delivery schedule. Nature takes her sweet time, and she demands that we slow down, quiet our minds, and pay attention. Over the next few days, you need to keep an eye on your jars. Do not open them under any circumstances. Just look through the glass. At first, you might not see anything at all, and you might start to worry that you did something wrong. But if you are patient, usually around day 4 or 5, you're going to see a tiny, faint white fuzz starting to reach out from that little piece of mushroom stem we planted. It might look a little bit like a fine wisp of cotton or a very delicate spider web. That is the mycelium waking up. That is the living network stretching out, looking for food. Over the next 2 to 3 weeks, that white fuzz is going to spread. It will reach from one kernel of corn to the next, slowly consuming the carbohydrates we provided. You want to see strong, pure white growth. If you could smell it, it should smell earthy, exactly like a damp forest floor right after a good, heavy spring rain. But here's where we need to have another honest conversation about the reality of doing things the old-fashioned way. Sometimes, despite your absolute best efforts, things go wrong. If you look at your jar and you see a patch of fuzzy green, slimy black, or a bright pink color growing alongside your white mycelium, you have a contamination problem. That means a wild spore from your kitchen, or maybe a stubborn one that somehow survived our double boiling method, got a foothold inside the grain. If you see green mold, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not open that jar inside your house. That green powder is made of millions of fresh mold spores. If you pop that lid off, those spores will become airborne and contaminate your entire kitchen, making it twice as hard to grow mushrooms the next time around. If a jar goes bad, you take it straight outside to the far edge of the property or toss it into the compost pile. You dump it out, you wash the glass thoroughly with hot soapy water and a splash of bleach, and you try again. There is no shame in a failed jar. My grandfather used to say that a man who never makes a mistake is a man who never does any real work. You learn from it, you clean your workspace a little better next time, and you start over. Assuming everything goes right, after about 3 to 4 weeks, your entire jar of corn will be completely swallowed up by that pure white mycelium. It will look almost like a solid block of white foam. When it reaches that stage, you have successfully isolated and multiplied your mushroom spawn. You now have a powerful living engine ready to produce food. When you hold that fully white jar of corn in your hands, I want you to take a moment and really think about what you have accomplished. You have taken a piece of scrap, a stem that most folks would just toss into the garbage disposal, and you have turned it into life. You have bypassed the massive agricultural corporations, the plastic packaging factories, the diesel trucking companies, and the retail grocery chains. They spend billions of dollars trying to convince you that you need their complicated, expensive systems to feed your family. They want you helpless without them. But right there, in a reused glass jar sitting on a dark shelf, you have proven them wrong. You have tapped into a cycle of nature that is thousands of years old. It is a profound feeling, stepping off that treadmill of constantly buying and consuming. It is the exact same feeling my ancestors had when they brought in the autumn harvest, knowing they had enough laid by to survive the long winter without asking anybody for a handout. It is about taking back control of your own home, one small project at a time. Every mushroom you grow from here on out is a quiet rebellion against a world that wants to charge you a fee for your basic survival. If you're not ready to grow the actual mushrooms the moment the jar is ready, that is perfectly fine. You can take that fully colonized jar, leave the lid exactly as it is with the cotton plug, and set it right inside your refrigerator. The cold temperatures will put the mycelium to sleep, pushing it into a state of hibernation. It will stay perfectly viable in that cold storage for 2 to 3 months. That gives you plenty of time to gather the materials for the next step of our journey. Which brings me to your homework for this week. I'm not just talking to hear my own voice here. I want you to actually take action. This week, I want you to go down to the market and find the absolute best, thickest stemmed oyster mushroom you can get your hands on. Dig through your pantry or head to the local feed store and get some dry whole corn, wheat berries, or brown rice. I want you to get your jars sterilized, get your corn boiled, and get your own mycelium planted. Remember our safety word rules. Keep that rubbing alcohol far away from your stove burner, and once those jars are incubating, make sure they are sitting somewhere secure. Keep them well out of reach of curious grandkids and the farm dogs. A broken glass jar full of grain is a mess nobody needs to clean up. Once you get your jars set up, I want you to come back here and leave me a comment. Tell me what kind of grain you ended up using. Did you go with the field corn, the sorghum, or did you use brown rice? Let me know how the sterilization process went for you. You know I read every single comment you folks leave, and I try my best to answer as many as I can. We are building a community of self-reliant folks here, and we need to share our knowledge with one another. In our next video, we are going to take the fully white colonized corn seeds we made today, and we are going to use them to grow a massive harvest of edible mushrooms. We are not going to buy expensive growing bags either. We are going to use old, discarded plastic bottles and turn trash into a continuous supply of fresh food for the dinner table. You're not going to want to miss it. Until then, remember the old ways. Waste nothing, rely on yourself, and let the land provide. See you next time.